Hail, Dicelings, and ready your calculators because today we are studying calculus. No, not really. Just a joke. I'm actually trying out a new green screen, so this is going to be the new look of drop dice in general. I'm kind of playing with technology, doing some fun stuff, but here in the library, I want to talk about a new book that's coming out. Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I've remained a little quiet on the topic because I wanted to get a little bit stronger opinion before I necessarily blurted out kind of an unbiased, uneducated response. I'm looking at you, Reddit, because a lot of people are going visceral one way or another, either positive or against, and it's really kind of dividing the group. Every time there's a new edition of any game that's well loved, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Legend of the Five Rings, Call of Cthulhu, or really anything, Savage Worlds even, which is coming out with the 2nd edition, Apocalypse World, which just had its 2nd edition. There's always kind of this weird divide that happens, and this crazy, like, end of the world coming of Jesus thing that happens. So one group says it's the end of the world, the company's going to go under, it's all terrible. And then there's another group that crops up that says, oh, this is going to be the best thing ever. This is the greatest invention since sliced bread. I like to take kind of middle ground in there, and I say, I'm very positive for it. I want to believe in the company for to do this well, and that they're going to understand their customers enough to give them the product that they want. So I am optimistic that the product will turn out well, but that does mean that people do have to play the game and provide feedback. With that said, make sure that you provide good feedback, accurate feedback, and feedback that is relevant to the game. The reason I say that is because there's a lot of games that change really dynamically through their playtesting phases. A really good example is right here on my shelf, Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark, when it first came out inside the Kickstarter, I backed it to get the PDF version, and I thought it was amazing as its first edition. And then it went through this weird period in the middle where I was like, oh my god, why did I put money in this game? I don't like any of these changes, and it's just getting weird and hard to play, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. And John Harper took a really long time to put this game out. If I remember right, I backed it 2 years later it finished, and then I got the book like 6 months after that. It was a very, very long process. Pathfinder, I hope, doesn't do anything quite like that, but I hope that they do take the time that John did when writing Blades in the Dark. Because of all the effort that he put in, the game is actually much, much, much better than where it started. It does not do exactly what it did at the very beginning, but the spirit is there, and he took in a lot of the stuff that people were feeding back to him to really embrace and make the game that people wanted. So, with that in mind, that's why the feedback is so important. Let's kind of talk about it a little bit and why I'm a little optimistic. Now, I reserve the right to change my opinion on any of this stuff once we get the playtest and we can read, but I'm going to call it right now, hashtag making it to level 20. My intent is to play the game completely. A little bit of background with me and Paizo. When I got out of the military, it was 2009, I was playing 3.5, and this new company, Paizo, started putting out these crazy red dragon pictures with fighters and stuff like that, and it's like D&D 3.75. 4th edition was also out. 4th edition never really gained traction with the group that I was playing with. We were playing 3.5. We were pretty happy with it. We were in the middle of a campaign. So we never really got to that point. But I started talking to other people that were playing 4th edition. And what they were playing was the encounters that WotC put out. And at the game stores, the kind of like weekly encounter missions. If you played them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. For anybody who didn't play them, basically they kind of play out like this. Here's an adventure, go get the MacGuffin. Here's a bunch of stuff to fight. It feels like it's a lot of one-shots, and the substance is not there. I do love a good one-shot, but the one-shots that you tend to find on YouTube are a lot better quality as far as the story is concerned than the encounters. The encounters were literally like, here's a shopping list, check off the boxes, congratulations, you won. Here's a big fight at the end. And that's basically how all of them were built. A lot of people kind of got drained from that because while it is fun fighting things, without a story element inside there, it kind of hurts the purpose of why we do this game. That said, I've done some retrospect on 4th edition, and I'm firmly in the belief that in the hands of a good GM, 4th edition could be a very fun and engaging game to play. I haven't had the chance to do it, so my opinions may not be accurate. Let's get back to Pathfinder. So, I discover Pathfinder. We're playing inside a game store called Pandemonium Books. As our game continues, we start adding a little bit more Pathfinder stuff. We play adventure module, we grab some monsters from here and there, and then they come out with this playtest. The playtest is for their own version of the rules. And we're all really excited about it. We're like, okay, let's see what they've got to give us and see if it's worth our time. And I can't say that we were disappointed. It was really cool. So one of the things that they're doing inside the Pathfinder 2nd edition playtest is they're running it very similar to the 1st edition playtest, which is they're putting out a hardback print copy. They're releasing PDFs. Excuse me. And for 2nd edition, they also have leather-bound special collector's edition one. So I will probably not get the hardbounds, simply because I knew a couple people that did get hardbounds in Pathfinder's 1st edition. While it's cool and it's on the shelf, basically a week from printing, we already had updated rules. So buyer beware on that one. It is a neat collector's piece to say that you were a part of it, and to have a book that you pinned in and made errata the old-fashioned way with like whiteout and markers and pens and all that stuff, post-it notes, kind of the old-school method. It reminds me a lot of like when you update tech manuals inside the military. So we go through the playtest, and we have a blast with it. We really enjoy the fact that we are a little bit more powerful than we were in 3.5, and we didn't necessarily rely on magic items as much. So it's funny to me because there's a lot of like stuff going on Reddit with people like upset, and people in Pathfinder from Paizo are saying that they didn't want to include the Christmas tree, which is basically putting armor and weapons and stuff all over your body to make you the most optimized person that you are. Funny enough, my experiences with Pathfinder have been very, very different. Most of our games have very little magic items. You would get magic swords because you had to have them to fight some of the bigger monsters, but like belts of giant strength, there would be like one a campaign. You didn't get a ton of that stuff all the time. Our games were more struggle-based than I guess people are used to with Pathfinder, and we didn't end up in this crazy power bloat that some people sometimes talk about with Pathfinder, about all these multipliers because of all these items and situational blah, 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 blah. That's a GM's choice and prerogative. There's nothing in the book that says that you have to give them all these items. And from gameplay, I don't see anything in the game that actually forces you to actually be on this treadmill of grab everything in the aisle, put it on you, make yourself better and better. In fact, at one point we were making a joke because one GM was so stingy with his magic items that the only way that you would have a magic sword in his game is if you played a Magus, because they make their own magic sword, or shield if you happen to pick the right archetype. So I just didn't have that experience. So for me, I had a lot of fun with Pathfinder. So I am optimistic and hoping that they're going to stay true to their core audience. What I ended up doing, there we go, is that I actually started pushing Pathfinder at conventions. I was selling it and doing demo games and stuff like that. And instead of doing the demo games that were the pre-constructed encounter style of adventure paths and things like that, my main focus was teaching GMs how to use Pathfinder to create their game, to create their game world, how to utilize it and tell their stories. So a lot of times at these conventions, I would have the same pre-generated characters, and I would put them in different scenarios, but the pre-gen characters that I used were all characters that I made up. I put in silly background details, and it was just a lot of fun to have people play and interact. You may occasionally hear the people on my channel talk about the Delude brothers or the family Delude. They actually come from those pre-generated characters. So that is kind of my background, how I'm attached to Pathfinder in the broadest of spectrums. I'm no longer at that point. I'm no longer employed by them. I work a totally different category of work nowadays, but they were a really good company. Jason Boldman was really cool to work with when I got to see him occasionally at some of the shows and things like that. And just overall, they were very receptive to what players wanted. So I'm hoping that they've kept true to that. I mean, it has been 10 years since their launch, so anything could have changed or happened since then. Let's talk about the game. So the game was posted on the Glass Cannon podcast. This is the first time I've actually heard that podcast. I listen to a ton of games, but most of my games typically are on YouTube, which means I may have missed this one inside my searchings and Googling and things like that. With that said, it was very enjoyable. So if you are looking for a good podcast that is kind of funny and fun, voice acting is in there, and it's usually like bad voice acting, not like professional voice actors like Critical Role, but like just some guys doing some Mark Wahlberg impressions. It's pretty good. That was a lot of fun, and it had kind of the heart of some of the more fun games that I remember playing as a dungeon master with my group in person. Sometimes we would just cut loose and have fun and make jokes in the game. And it wasn't about us not caring about the game or taking the game serious. It was more like, let's have a good time. And I kind of want to go back to more of that, especially when I'm playing Pathfinder, which I will be doing with 2nd edition. So let me talk about some of the things that I'm excited for tentatively. I reserve the right to change my opinion on any of this stuff once the game comes out and we can read it. But man, there are some big changes happening. So my original prediction before I heard the Glass Cannon was it's probably going to be something closer to like Starfinder. And there is a lot of stuff inside there that sounds like some of the stuff from Starfinder. They are going to be using backgrounds, which I assume they're probably going to go more like the backgrounds in Starfinder rather than something like 5th edition. But they are cleaning up the action economy, which we kind of saw a little bit of in Starfinder, but it wasn't cleaned up as much as it is right now. I use the term cleaned up because they're trying to streamline it. I don't necessarily have an opinion on if I like it better now or less than I did before. So the way the action economy works now is you get 3 actions. Everything is determined by actions. So movement is an action, placing your shield in front of you is an action, which I'm on the fence about that whole move thing. That putting your shield in front of you should count against you. I haven't seen how it works out in play, but I feel like it's probably going to hurt fighters as far as the difference between fighters and casters, because it's pretty drastic in Pathfinder. If you take away their ability to do something else because you want them to put their shield up, I can't imagine too many people going for the shield when instead they could take another attack. You could take a second attack or an attack. If second attack basically works the same way it does in 1st edition Pathfinder, except for instead of having to level up to get it, you can do it immediately at level 1, and it's going to incur a -5 penalty, with the exception of some fencing style weapons or light weapons, it seems. They took a -4 for their second attack. Just to kind of talk about it, the characters inside this game were very much low-level characters. I'm not sure if they were 1st level or 3rd or what exactly they were, but they missed a lot of attacks, especially when they went for that second attack to try and make up for it. They almost always missed that one. So the action economy is a little different. One of the actions that I really liked is initiative. Well, it's not really an action. It's outside of the action order. It's just kind of like how things start. But initiative is based upon narratively where your character is before the fight starts. This is kind of a cool concept. So there were a couple characters that were just cruising down the hallway. They got perception checks. There was a character that was rolling for survival. He failed his roll, so unfortunately he could not use survival because he couldn't find tracks to be able to use for initiative. But had he succeed, Jason talked about the fact that he would be able to use survival, which is a really cool concept, because if you have a ranger and you focus in on your survival, being able to use that as your main mode of like exploring and being able to jump into a fight and be able to use that as the carryover is really cool. I like it. It takes a little bit of inspiration from other games like Burning Wheel, where they have like a let it ride rule, but it's applied a little bit differently. So I mentioned it that there's types of play. So this is akin to Blades in the Dark here. Blades in the Dark basically functions as there's phases of play, and it's a little bit like a board game. Essentially, and the fact that during this phase you're allowed these types of actions, during this phase you're allowed these types of actions, during this phase you're allowed these types of actions. That part feels a little gamey, and I'm okay with that because I've seen it in play in other games, and I actually really like the way it functions. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is actually doing something similar to that. They're doing an exploration, social, and a encounter kind of style of modes of play. So, but they are encouraging you to flow between them, and that you should be able to use all of them, which is really good. I like the sound of that. One of the things that they talked about as well inside the blog was how hazards and terrain and traps were going to be more of a thing even for the players to use, so that's pretty exciting. Just because that stuff, it is hard for a GM to remember that stuff all the time. I know any game that I use any sort of hazardous terrains and things like that, I have to write a note card for me. I run almost entirely on the fly, but when it comes to social hazard, or not social hazards, when it comes to natural hazards and things like that, I tend to forget them. So I have to write reminders to myself, and to have a game that's going to have that kind of built in and encouraged is probably going to help me refine my personal issues with that. So pretty excited about that. I know that technically I could do that with any system, but when a system tells you that this is part of the system, this is its design, it does force you to accept that as part of its design. So it helps you. So really like the idea of modes of play. I've seen it done poorly, so I'm a little on the fence about that one. I want to see how it plays out more in more plays and things like that. I want to play the playtest and engage with it and kind of have some fun. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was this dynamic critical failures and critical rolls. Basically, if you were to make a +10 or a -10 against a DC or an armor class or whatever the case is, you would get a critical success or failure. I kind of like this simply because it's a swinging number based upon the situation at hand. So a easier to break lock, you beat it by 10. Let's say that the lock is a 15, you roll a 25 using regular Pathfinder numbers. I know people coming from 5th edition, that's crazy. 25 is a lot. You'd have to be like a 6th level character or something like that to really get that kind of a roll, or be a rogue who has an expert in lock picking, or excuse me, thieves tools, but you get the idea. So I really like that idea that there's kind of this swing result thing. It also encourages the fact that regardless of how talented you are, failure is still an option. So if you are working against that or that DC 15 lock, if you get a 5, well, it's not a 1, your total is still lower, and so it does kind of perpetuate this idea that you're going to have lucky days and bad luck days at the same time. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. Tentatively, I like the sounds of it. One thing that I will say that I am kind of against right now, just off the fly, I'm really not a super fan of, is the way skills seem to be assembled. Now, I haven't seen it written down enough to know for certain, but what it sounds like is, from the exposition that Jason gave before this first skill check, is that it's based upon your modifier, or excuse me, your level, and then if you are trained, you get to add your modifier. If you are a it's unskilled, trained, and expert. That's the 3 levels. So untrained is just your level. Trained is your modifier, gets added to your level, and then expert, you get a +1. I'm not sure how the DCs work, but if the DCs work as they did in Pathfinder 1st edition, that +1 doesn't matter. So I've brought this up before with my friends. One of the things that I dislike about bounded accuracy in 5th edition is the fact that everybody feels as good at everything as everybody else. Nobody feels particularly special or important or critical to the group, because frankly, my mage could pick a lock about as good as a rogue can. Sure, the rogue might get double proficiency, but that's not a huge difference when it comes to what the actual numbers are that are going to be rolled as a result. So can I get along without a rogue? Probably. And in fact, my mage can just cast open and close and get past the lock anyways. So that's a whole different problem. I like when characters are specialized and stand out from each other, so for me, I would like to see either that gap extended or a little bit more knowledge on how the DCs are going to be adjusted to accommodate and make that +1 actually matter. It's a really small number. What I would really like to have seen is in Pathfinder, when you become trained in a skill, you get a +3 added to your total. I would like that same +3 on there. I think 3 is a pretty good number. I've talked about with my friends that that what I'd like to see is that when you take a skill in 5th edition to make me feel a little bit more special and like I'm more skilled at it, that you double the proficiency just to start, and if they are expert, they get triple proficiency. We toyed with that for a little while. I actually liked it a lot better, but I don't use it all that often with rules and things like that. So, sorry, with campaigns and things like that. It is late for me. I've been up since like 2 a.m., so I'm kind of stuttering here, so sorry about that, guys. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the types of weapons inside the game. It sounds like the weapons are going to have like a tier system inside there or some sort of leveling, which is kind of reminiscent of some of the stuff we saw with Starfinder, that there's like different qualities of things and that there's maybe possibly level requirements for gear. That wasn't made clear. I'm a little on the fence about that. I don't really care for the way the weapon level thing worked out in Starfinder, just because it is like kind of a weird thing to kind of track and understand, especially for like counterbalance and things like that. But basically the way that they made the weapons, and Jason talks about it during the podcast, is that there's 4 ranks: poor, expert, master, and legend. And yes, I'm reading them off paper because I had to write them down. Poor is your standard one. This is the thing that the adventurer starts with, which I really like. It's kind of like you have your father's sword is how I'm thinking of it right now. And then if you choose to craft, you could actually like take your weapons and upgrade them over time. The samurai from Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, Oriental Adventures, which was basically L5R made into D&D, actually their samurai had that kind of a feature where as he leveled up, he could make his swords better. They were like magical in that case, but this is a non-magical kind of a crafting bonus. So kind of like Masterwork, except for instead of choosing whether that +1 goes to damage or attack, it just goes to attack. So Expert gives you a +1, Master gives you a +2, and Legendary gives you a +3. So I really like that because I know that one of my GMs, Murdoch, is going to eat that up because we've put that in our games already. Inside the past, when we've played, we've had Masterwork, but we've had non-magical +1 weapons, which is due to the crafting. That basically, it was a weapon that did not count as magic, but it was a +1 to attack and damage. We had master craftsmen inside the world that could produce these legendary weapons and things like that. So it gave kind of like a mundane weapon difference versus a magic weapon difference. And magic weapons were like capital M magic weapons. So things like the Sun Sword, the Holy Avengers, things like that. +1 weapons were generally just a sword that some badass smith put together. And that's kind of how we played it in the game. So I really like kind of this structure here. It helps reinforce a style of play that we were already embracing. Let's talk about some of the other stuff that was kind of noticeable. First off, Goblins are a race in Pathfinder 2nd edition. I have not seen too many people that are upset about that one. I think it was a really good move for Pathfinder. Pathfinder has these very iconic, gigantic-headed, big-mouthed goblins that are just adorably ugly. And it's like their brand. So I thought that was a really, really smart move on their part, is to make them a player race. I would love to see how they put them into the game as a player race. If they're going to be legitimate goblins that steal babies and burn villages, and you just happen to turn your back on goblin society, and now you have to fight off all that racial hatred that comes with it. I would be interested if it goes that way, or if they've basically established a canon reason as to why goblins aren't persecuted and killed by guards upon entering a city because of something that happened in the Pathfinder 1 first edition, I should say, Galorian timeline. That would be my absolute favorite if it does happen. I would love for basically the Weeby Goblins game stories to basically have shaped Galorian enough that goblins are openly accepted, and there's like contentions and kind of subtle hatred and racism, but not like full blown the guards are going to kill you kind of nonsense. So real excited to see that. They said that the Alchemist is going to be a base class. Let me tell you some of the things that I'm hopeful for in the second edition. Everything from the Advanced Class Guide. So the ACG is probably my favorite thing to come from Pathfinder. Pathfinder and I split ways when 5th edition came out, and that was mainly so I could try 5th edition, give it a really good shake before I made my determinations on where it was based upon what it was in playtest versus what it came out with. For anybody who's not aware of my opinions on it, I actually really liked when it was D&D Next, some of the first playtest materials. I really enjoyed the way that that played. And as it went on, the rules kept getting scaled back and cut down and streamlined, and the game became more and more narratively focused than mechanical focused. And that's just not the kind of games that I necessarily gravitate to. So for me, 5th edition, I play it because it's easy to get players and I get enjoyable stories out of it, but I don't get the same itch scratched as I do when I play something a little bit crunchier. Which is funny because games that I think are crunchier are still in the narrative realm, but still very exciting to me. I mentioned Blades of the Dark earlier. Slightly crunchier to me, and it's a little bit more mechanically interesting to me. I've got a campaign of Burning Wheel, which is by far the crunchiest system I've ever seen in my life, that I'm very excited about. I love Legend of the Five Rings. Very complicated system, but easy once you get it down. It's all my systems that I enjoy, they have a high barrier of entry just to learn the system, and then once you learn it, it's like lightning in a bottle. It just goes, and it has these little tiny things that just work intricately together. So for me, I'm hoping that Pathfinder cleaned up its system, because before it was kind of like two blocky cogs that were just kind of circling each other to make this machine work. I'm hoping that they refined it, and maybe they're fine-tooth cogs, like a nice Swiss watch this time. But we'll see. I don't have a whole lot of hope for that. There's not a lot of games that get to that level of artistry in their design. So I'm not super hopeful of that, but I would love if it came together a little smoother as we see the final product. But the differences between D&D Next and 5th edition is the things that I want to talk about here. Pathfinder just released this stuff. This has been spat at viscerally by people on both sides of the spectrum as far as like what it's doing to Pathfinder. Is it worth it? Will Paizo sink? All this stuff has been kind of going on and on and on. And we don't really know what Pathfinder 2nd edition is going to be just yet. If it continues to feel like customization is king and that there will be some level of complex mechanics inside there that do require some game mastery, I'll be very happy with it in the end, and it will probably be my go-to for just cheesy fun time fantasy games. I played Pathfinder for years and years and years. Actually, before the channel started, I played it into the channel, and we didn't air the Pathfinder games. That was just us having fun for ourselves. I have a lot of really good memories with Pathfinder. So I'm very glad to see it get another edition. Just like when D&D came out with its 5th edition, I was super glad to see it because D&D is where I cut my teeth. That's where I started as a role player. So I was super excited to see the game get reinvented and changed. And even if you hate the idea of a 2nd edition, that you don't feel it's necessary, you should be excited that ideas are still flowing through this community and that change is a good thing in the long run. Without this change and things like that, we wouldn't have such awesome things as like your PlayStation 4. I mean, really, that's what we're talking about here, is a new engine to power the games we love. It's not going to change the fact that we love RPGs. It's not going to change our passion about the hobby. It's just going to change how we play them, or if we play them with this system. Again, who knows what this thing's going to look like when it's done. I am hopeful that Paizo will put a good amount of effort into making this the best product that they can, and I really, really hope that they stick to their guns and that they're refining Pathfinder and that they're not doing 5e, reforged, refined, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to see a D&D 5.5 really ever. I just don't think that that game has enough appeal to me that I would want to see that as a redone version. And I'm sure that there's somebody who's on the opposite end of the spectrum as me. In fact, on Forgecast, who I've had many interactions with, he has a 5e reforged. I will say I like the way he does his because he does put emphasis on mechanical design and all those customization things. But if you wanted to make it more streamlined and more fluffy and more this, that, and the other thing of all that narrative aspect of 5th edition, that's where I would lose it. And that's where some of the discussion is saying that Pathfinder should become more and more narrative. I think it should be the opposite. Pathfinder should be a crunchier system, a game that has some mastery for the mechanics. D&D has mastery for the art, for the skill, for the storytelling. And that doesn't mean that it has to be one way or another. You can get that with both systems, but I like that difference. Once you play a lot of games, you'll probably find out exactly what kind of gamer you are. So inside the comments below, what I'd like you to do is, as you bring your mouse down, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you disliked it, give me a thumbs down. That's totally cool. We're still friends, maybe. But what I'd like you to do is in the comments section, tell me what you prefer. Slightly crunchier games where the mechanics are slightly more important and more driving for the story and how it functions, or do you like a little bit more narrative games? And it's perfectly fine if you say that you like balanced games. I just kind of want to know where people are at, because this is ultimately the thing that's going to come up a lot with how this playtest goes. About 40% of gamers are aware of what Pathfinder is and played it and that sort of thing. That's a number I'm pulling out of my ass that I saw on a Facebook post somewhere that I assume came out of somebody else's ass. So I'm just going to stick with it. It's a Snapple fact right there. But yeah, Pathfinder was a lot of fun. And I hope that I get to enjoy a lot of that same fun with 2nd edition. That's my big hope here for 2nd. And I know that my group is also excited. We've been talking on Facebook chat, and we're all on board with playtesting it. We playtested a ton of stuff. Every new class that came out for Pathfinder up until probably about 2012, maybe? No, probably later than that, like 2013. We playtested every single thing that came out through that game, and had tons and tons of fun doing it. I remember one of my favorite characters was Regret the Grain Merchant, who started as a monk. We quickly realized he should have been a ninja, so we broke out the playtest rules for a ninja, and I had a stellar time playing a drunkard ninja that portrayed himself as a wine merchant. It was different. But let's see your comments. And let's get a conversation going. When we get some more on Monday, I plan to review that content and get back with you guys a little bit more about that. If I remember right, looking at the blog, which I have open on another screen here, let's see here. Looks like Monday they are coming out with how you level up and through the new rules. So that will be interesting. They seem to be hinting at a couple different variations and rules about how you level up, your skills change, and how your spells maybe change. So I'm interested to see how that works. I'll give you guys my opinion on it once I read more, and hopefully the conversation will continue. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you at the gaming table.